This webinar is about NVC, nonviolent communication in organizations, with the subtitle, How to be Compassionate and Real. The reason for that is because that sometimes we think we can just do either or, especially when we're in some sort of formal or official context. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of that, but Sociocracy for All is a nonprofit that is doing education and training around sociocracy. And for those who do not know what sociocracy is, I highly recommend it. It's a system of how we can share power in an organization. And for us, we're both co-founders, Jerry Koch-Gonzalez and me, Jennifer Rao. And for us, it really goes together. It's actually even more than that. It is that sociocracy builds on good communication skills, and good communication skills in a situation where the people can exercise power over us is just not as much fun. So that is the one thing that is my part in this presentation, is to give you the reason. So what is the relationship between sociocracy and NVC? Why are we doing this? How does this go together? Many of you know us through sociocracy, and maybe some of you are here only because of NVC and have no idea what sociocracy is. So here's how they go together. One thing that is important about sharing power in a sort of flat organization where we actually really are equals in decision making is that we have to figure out more of how we do things. If we have a boss that tells us what to do, we have clarity. We just do what the boss wants. If we do not have a boss telling us what to do, then we have to figure it out ourselves. And we need clarity for that. And clarity is a huge, is very important for governance, because experience shows that whenever there's no clarity, there can be tension coming up. So that's why in a organization where we share decision making, we have a higher need for clarity. The other thing is that if we have shared power in our organization, we still, that might be the case in terms of how power is distributed, we still have to fill that structure with life. We still have to live that, the being equals in every micro interaction in our organization. Just having bylaws that declare everybody has equal power does not change that much. We actually have to fill it with life and live it. And that requires practice, and it requires extra skills than just governance skills. The other thing is that sociocratic organizations, or any organization that have a good way of sharing power, they create culture change, but culture change doesn't just happen from one day to the other. It needs practice, because for most of us, that's a safe bet. We didn't grow up in a system where we were equals in decision making, because there's power over structures in parenting, in schools, in organizations. It's just everywhere. And there are all the patterns around oppression in our societies. So for instance, sociocratic organization can create a space that is safe and where we are equals. But it's the practice over time that then will create actual culture change. And that is what NVC is good for, to support that. And so that was me framing why Sociocracy for All, we call it SOFA, is teaching NVC. And coincidentally, Jerry, who is co-founder of Sociocracy for All, is also actually has a longer history with NVC. And he's a certified NVC trainer and has done that for many, many years. And I'm going to hand over to you. Would you introduce yourself beyond what I said? Thank you.
Okay. So I've been a social change activist all my life, and I learned NVC at first from my participation in a group called the Movement for New Society. In the 1970s, we were working for social justice in various ways from a nonviolent perspective. And we met Marshall Rosenberg, published his first little pamphlet on nonviolent communication. And I, years later, discovered Sociocracy at, in particularly almost at a nonviolent communication workshop, where I met some folks who were trying to do co-housing community and sociocracy and nonviolent communication. And that all wraps up to how I live right now. I live in a co-housing community that operates by the sociocratic approach of governance, and we have a lot of practice of nonviolent communication in our community. Being a social change activist, you know, brings up just a lot of pain, looking out at the world, and just seeing how much distress our whole planet is in at this time. And then in particular, what affects me is that those of us who work for justice have a hard time working together with each other. That's where, you know, I'm drawn to sociocracy and nonviolent communication, as here are structures, here are approaches that might help us work more effectively together. Because there's nothing more painful to see the world in distress and to look around at our allies and compatriots who are trying to make this world a better place, and we're making a mess out of how we work together. So how can we become more effective? And so, yeah, that brings us to nonviolent communication. In this webinar, we're not going to explain sociocracy, but we will do some explanation of nonviolent communication, and then give some stories about that in the workplace, and then hear from you questions that you have, or hear from situations that you're involved in that you wonder how to deal with from a nonviolent communication perspective in those contexts. So, what is nonviolent communication? So the place where I start is the assumption that we all share the same human needs, and that everything we do to meet needs. So what are these needs? You know, connection, companionship, safety, harmony, choice. You know, we can name all these needs beyond the basics of survival: air, water, food, shelter. But these are the needs that we all need to survive and thrive. At the level of needs, we're not in conflict with each other because we all have these. At the level of strategies, the things that we do to meet the needs, that's where the conflicts come. You know, we fight over who's going to control the water, etc. So at the one of the needs is, and for me, probably the most central one, is connection. How are we connected to each other? And there are many ways to build that connection with each other. We can party together. We can text each other messages. We can go to a concert and share those kind of experiences together. So for any need, there's multiple ways of trying to get those needs met. When our needs for connection are met, you know, we're kind of like, our cup is like full. When our needs for connection aren't met, then our cup is nearly empty. And this really affects how we wind up connecting to others. The assumption that I mentioned earlier, everything we do to meet needs. And for me, this is kind of the critical notion about NVC, and that changes everything. Traditionally, you know, when I see somebody doing something I don't think makes sense, I would be judgmental about it. You know, look at this person. How can they be? You know, that is so stupid. They're risking their life, you know, trying to do this rock climbing stuff. And why would somebody endanger themselves like that? How could they be so stupid? So I go to my judgmental place. Instead of judging right and wrong, what NVC brings to me in that statement of everything we do to meet needs is to get curious, to wonder what needs are people trying to meet when they do what they do. So I wonder what it's like, for this person, for someone to go rock climbing, and what kind of an experience, what kind of needs are they meeting by doing this? So curiosity. So needs meeting. Now let me turn to organizations. So NVC in organizations. What are we talking about here? So what's an organization? An organization is people coming together to produce a product or to deliver a service. They come together around a particular strategy, a purpose, a shared aim. And to those ends, they have this set of interlocking relationships with each other. In any set of relationships, events happen that trigger people. And in those contexts, what are our choices? NVC names 3 of them. Self-empathy. And for self-empathy, I want to consider, how full is my cup? How full is my resource of understanding myself? Then there is empathy for the other. What is going on for the other person? What attention do I have for noticing what the needs are for the other person that's motivating their behavior? So is my cup of resource of self-empathy full enough that I can pay attention to what is going on to the other person? And the third option is the honest self-expression. When I have enough resource in me that I'm clear what's going on for me, and I have a sense that the other person has enough resource in them that they can hear what I'm going to say, then I can express myself and say, hey, this that happened raised these feelings for me out of these needs, and I have a request to make in response to this trigger event of how to make life more wonderful for the both of us. Would you be willing to hear that? So a little more, I guess, detail on any of these situations. So self-empathy. The question is, what are my needs? And this is not so easy because we don't have a language of needs that we have grown up with. We have done more work around our language of feelings. Am I feeling sad, mad, glad? And the 2 parts of self-empathy are understanding what my feelings are and what do they rise from. What needs of mine are met or unmet that give rise to those feelings. So this relationship between feelings and needs. When we are triggered, when I am triggered, and I'm noticing that my cup of self-empathy is not full, then what do I want to do? I want to take a time out. I want to, if I can, remove myself from the situation. That might be physically out of the room, like saying to somebody, okay, this is an important issue you've raised. I want to think about it some and I'll get back to you. So giving myself that space that I can go somewhere and go, okay, Jerry, what's going on for you? Why are you triggered here? What's going on? So any kind of timeout, whether it's removing myself physically from the situation, asking for the time to think about it, to just doing that very quick in my mind, okay, Jerry, what's going on? Okay, now I'm ready to be present. It might take me all of 6 seconds to do that if I'm lucky. What I want is to slow things down so that I can come back into an exchange with somebody else from an energy of my own choosing, because I am centered and grounded in my own self-understanding. As we say sometimes, it only takes 6 seconds to go from being reactive to being in choice, to being conscious. Okay, so the trigger happens. somebody has done or said something, what happens, after I've gathered a sense of what's going on for me, then I create some space in me to be curious about what is going on for the other person. I wonder, what might the other person be needing? What has led them, what need of theirs has led them to behave in the way that they have? Can I do some guessing about that? I never know for sure because they are different than I am. I can only use my own experience and my sense absorption of what they're doing, how they're speaking, to guess what might be going on for them. I can do that silently. I don't need to say it out loud. But even if I do it silently, I am setting myself up into the position of curiosity, of openness. So shifting again from blaming the other to being curious about what might be going on for them. And if I notice any blame energy in me, then that is useful information, because I can notice what it is that I'm blaming about, and that becomes input into my self-empathy, into my clarity about what are my needs and what might be their needs. So any blame energy I can turn around and examine and see, okay, why am I doing this blame here? What's the need behind it? Is my need for safety? Is my need for consideration, to be understood, for a sense of connection? And so if my cup is full and I can do my self-empathy and my cup is full, I can pay attention to what's going on for the other, then the next piece of possibility is the honest self-expression. And the honest self-expression in the nonviolent communication has this kind of 4 parts. Right? What is the observation? How can I express, how can I explain, how can I witness what happened in a way that does not include judgmental statements? So rather than saying somebody said something rude to me, I can say, I heard you say that I was ineffective. Okay, I might have heard that. That's an observation. It's a quote. It's not my interpretation of what somebody said. And when I hear somebody say I'm ineffective, what feelings come up for me? Oh, I might feel sad. I might feel scared. What are my needs? My needs might be connection. I want to have a good relationship with this person. Or I might be scared because maybe my job might be on the line and I'm worried about my own safety and security. And then what might be my request be? What would I want to do as a result of this self-understanding to make life better? Well, I might want to ask the other person, I'm really interested in your perception, and would you be willing to tell me some more about how you experienced me as being ineffective? Can you give me an example of that? Because I really would like to learn and improve. So that can be an example of what the request would be. Okay. A little more about, I guess, about requests, because this becomes something that's really challenging for many of us. We often don't ask for help, and I certainly am one of those people who often is guilty of that. I like to think that I'm going to try to figure it out how to do it myself. I'll research on the web, I'll do this, I'll do that, and rather than just turning to Jennifer and say, hey, Jennifer, you got an idea about this? So that's an area where I know I need to keep improving, to believe myself, in a sense, worthy enough to ask for help. And since everybody has a desire, a need for contribution, that's inviting people to meet their needs by supporting me. It's not taking a resource away from them, but giving them an opportunity to contribute, to which they can say no, because it's a request and not a demand. Asking for what you want makes it more likely that you will get it. Right? Kind of a truism. But one of the things I remember hearing about fundraising is, if you're not getting 9 no's for every 10 requests, you're not asking enough. So ask for what you want. If you don't ask for funds, then your organization won't have funds. Speaking of sociocracy for all, that's a practice that we need to be doing, to ask for more support. So we ask, for example, in these webinars, say, contribute if you can, if you will. The first webinars we didn't ask for any funds. And yes, it's lovely. We want to make Sociocracy available to all. That's our name. But we also need resource to help us be able to do that. The requests, to be specific in our requests rather than vague. Again, that makes it more likely to get what we want. To be in the present time, meaning we're asking for present intention rather than a future promise, because we can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but we can say what our intention is in the present. And specific, doable. That they are something that we can manage to accomplish. Again, not so vague. Check my notes here. One of the big challenges around making requests is that sometimes what we ask for is not supported by the quality of relationship that we have with each other. If I'm talking now for a number of minutes and I'm starting to get thirsty, I can say to Jennifer, hey, Jennifer, could you get me a cup of water? And because we have a quality of relationship, no big deal. She'll get up, get the cup of water, and give it to me. If I'm asking Jennifer the same question and she's in that moment just sitting on just anger and frustration, whatever's going on in between us, and I'm making one more demand of her without any sense of appreciation, consideration, then maybe she won't get the cup of water. Or she'll do it with an energy that I won't enjoy. She'll slam the cup of water on my desk and it'll spill out. So what's in that case, the quality of relationship was not supporting that request. And what's needed there is, rather than this specific action request, is more of the connection request. What's going on between us? Do I understand what needs are alive in you as a response to what I just said? Did you understand what I was trying to say? Was the message that I sent received in the way that I intended? So those are more about the connection between us. And when I think, this applies not just in we are an organization here. So this is a workplace for us. Jennifer and I, as co-founders of Sociocracy for All, run into these issues of making sure that we are in a good place with each other as we make decisions. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say with this. Our energy is so oriented towards fixing that it's very easy for people to just first choices go to the fix it kinds of responses and requests, rather than the step back and making sure that the quality of communication is present there, that supports whatever the next steps might be. Okay, so how does this all play out in the workplace? And now I just go find my notes. So for any trigger that happens, and that's where I'll start, is how do I want to prepare myself to be present to what happened with that event? First of all is the check inside me. What do I want to do with this trigger? Do I want to get revenge and punish back the person who I see having done something negative to me? Do I want to prove to them that I'm right and that they're wrong? Or can I step deeply enough into the intent to connect? And what's the first step if I want to intend to connect? The first step is to do the self-empathy. What's coming up for me? Am I seeing the other person as enemy? Am I seeing myself as incompetent? So looking at that, trying to understand what the blame energy might be that I'm experiencing inside me, and turning that around, listening to that and turning it around into observations about what my needs might be, how I'm feeling, and letting that self-exploration calm me down so that I can now be more present to the other. So that's the next step, empathy for the other. What might be going on for them that led them to act in the way they did? The only reason they acted in the way they did is because they were seeking to meet some needs. So if I can go below the attention to the trigger thing that they said and pay attention to the need that might be driving their behavior, that's the place where I can connect. It's the curiosity that's most important, because whatever guess I might have about their needs might be wrong, and that's okay. It's not a problem. It's my curiosity. That's where I'm going to link into them. And if I wonder out loud what was going on for them and they say something different, then I might learn from that.
I just started again, the slide again.
Okay, so we're looking at a slide, and this is the sort of preparing myself for how to respond to a trigger. So the intention, what's my intention? The second step, what happened? You know, trying to be clear about what I observed versus my judgments that I'm putting on already. What's my self-empathy, the empathy for the other, guessing what came up for them. Checking in for myself. How resourced am I? Am I able in this moment to speak in the face of this discomfort, or do I need my time out? So that I can do some more preparing. How resourced might the other person be? Do I have a guess that they will be able to continue speaking with me in the face of discomfort when I speak back to them? What is the risk? If I now interact with this person who has said something that, or did something that triggered me, what happens if it doesn't go well? Is my job on the line? Would our relationship be in danger? Or is there enough relationship and context between us that the risk of my speaking up is fairly minor? Yes, we get upset with each other for a bit, but then I have the trust that we'll work it through. So an assessment of what the risk is, and then understanding how can I reduce the risk. You know? As sometimes is said, you know, if you have the risk of losing your job, you hope you have 3 months of expenses in the bank. So that, okay, I'm willing to say what I'm going to say because I have 3 months expenses in the bank, and if I do get fired, I'll be okay. I'll move on. Or I can just say to myself, you know, the risk here is too great. Yes, I'm triggered here, and I have something that I really want to say that's really important, and I'm going to choose to meet my need for safety and security, and I won't be speaking up in this moment. And I'll just keep thinking about how to be present continue to do this work. So yes, and risk mitigation, what else can I do to take care of myself, to think about how I can take care of myself in the possibility that this will happen again and again in this particular job situation or workplace that I am in. What support systems might I have? You know, go to a colleague, go to a friend, go to a counselor. Where am I going to keep refilling my own cup of self-empathy so that I can look at what somebody does and go, oh, that's what they did. They're coming from their need. I don't like their behavior, but I'm okay. And having done all that, then what's, you know, thought about all that, then what's my action plan? What is it that I want to be saying to this other person if I'm choosing to be involved with them? Or what am I going to do to take care of myself? And if I am going to go after the conversation with the other person, then it's a good time to recheck my intention. Am I still in the place where I'm coming from the energy of wanting to connect with them, wanting to understand what's going on for them? You know, breathe. Am I ready? Am I in that mindfulness place? So that for me is kind of the practice that might happen in just a few seconds as I stand there. or it might happen in a couple of hours as I go off and do my timeout and try to reflect on what happened. You know, that depends upon how triggered I was, right? Okay. All right, so I want to talk about a few other things to do. One is, and this was very important to me when I was first learning nonviolent communication, and that is journaling. This is part of what I can do with that time out. At the end of each day, I could go home, you know, or as I'm getting ready for bed, I would just spend a few minutes with my journal and say to myself, okay, what happened today that I'm still kind of unfinished about? What happened that I'm still triggered about? And then do that writing exploration. You know, what happened? What was I, you know, what am I feeling now? What needs of mine are not met? What, if anything, do I want to do about this tomorrow? And I could do that both for things that triggered me painfully and things that triggered me joyfully. What did anybody do that contributed to my well-being today? And did I acknowledge that as fully as I would have liked? And make that part of my intention for the next day. And that's particularly important because in our cultures, we do so much negative. We express the negative much more than we express the positive. And when we do express the positive, it's often in terms of, oh, that was great, you were wonderful. And we don't give the detail that actually is useful for the person to take in what it was that they did that actually made a difference. That's the feedback that we can use. So journaling. Another is any sharing that you can do within your organization where you are celebrating or mourning needs met or not met. The simplest example I have of this is, you know, within family. The family dinner table, here we are, and you know, we've got 5 kids at the dinner table. So we just do the round, share your highlights and your lowlights of the day. And each person is basically saying, here's what needs of mine were met or not met, here's how I feel as a result, and giving us a little bit of story of what that triggered. We don't have to use the needs and feelings language here. We just let the kids talk in their natural way. But we are in that context inviting them to express themselves, setting the context of culture of the organization, in this case our family, that we share this with each other, our needs met and not met. And that we're also practicing, as we do the round, we're practicing that sense of equivalence. That everyone's voice matters. The 4-year-old's experience matters. The 14-year-old's experience also matters. And the parents' experience also matters. So, you know, I can have the 4-year-old say, well, what about you? You know, you haven't shared yet, you know, and she knows what we're doing around and invites me to share. Mm-hmm. We do this a lot in closing of business meetings in organizations. It's like, okay, how did this meeting go? What went well? What could have been improved? What needs were met in terms of our productivity? What needs were met in terms of our process of working together? The more specific information we share, the more we can learn and improve over time. One of the, maybe follow up on that. Being specific about how people have contributed. So in a hospital context that I've worked in recently, after the trainings, they decided to put up on a whiteboard in their nurse meeting room to make notices there that say, the positive shout out, because they noticed how much they run on crisis all the time and all the problems all the time. And so choosing to pay attention to the positive. Hey, you know, nurse so-and-so, you know, you staying on after your shift was over when we were so overwhelmed was really a great contribution, you know, to all of our sense of ease and to the well-being of several of those patients that we had. Thank you. So being specific in your feedback. We live in a co-housing community here. cooperative housing community. And one of the things that we talk about sometimes is what we call coho moments. Moments that embody why we live in community. When I go out there with the shovel in hand, ready to dig out my car from several feet of snow, only to find that somebody else already did it. And in fact, they've gone down the whole row of cars and unearthed, 6 or 7 cars in a row. So those things happen not infrequently here. And we actually came up with that term, coho moments. And sometimes what we do when we have our community meeting is we'll go around and share, let's hear a round of coho moments so that we can celebrate what we are here for, the sense of living in community. And that those stories, again, are very specific. And the more specific they are, the more meaningful they are, the more inspiring they are to be replicated or do other things like that. One of the things that we do in our training programs with Sociocracy for All is do an assessment round at the beginning of our group, but this could happen at any point in the life of a group. You can go around in your team and say, I'm going to speak, I'll be the focus person, and I'll say, here are the strengths and challenges that I think I bring to working in this group. And then we go around, and the rest of the people in the team reflect what they also see as my strengths and my challenges. We hear from them all, and then it comes back to me, and okay, here's what I heard from all of you, and what sense I'm making of the feedback that I'm getting. And maybe we do another round and look at what are there any specific suggestions for how can I improve. And so I can gather those, and from that I can develop my development plan. How do I want to grow, improve the things that I don't do so well, and how do I want to do more of the things that I do well? This feedback is the key to growth and change and adaptability. It's one of the 3 pillars of sociocracy. And it's what NVC is sort of geared to do, is doing that honest expression, leading to that request, which then creates the possibility of change and improvement. One thing about feedback is that if it's sensitive feedback, that the person who receiving it might go into their self-blame or difficulty in listening, is that it's important for that to be delivered in a safe space. So privately, no public shaming. If you say that criticism, even though delivered beautifully with love, if you do it in a public space, it can be really challenging for the person to hear it. The other is to deliver feedback on a schedule, on an agreement. I have something I want to share with you. Could we talk about it, tomorrow at 2 o'clock when we have that break? Yes, okay, great. No unscheduled fights. You bring up significant issues in a space where people have the opportunity to breathe, reflect, be present with you, not in those moments when they don't have attention. Because then the fight becomes about the attention, about whether or not they have attention and whether or not they really care to listen to you, when in fact they might care, but there's something else going on that they're paying attention to. Other needs of theirs are present, and you don't want to compete your need to express yourself and the other person's need to do whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. Another aspect of, again, I'm thinking about the work with this hospital recently, is that when, they're now setting up a system of having what they call huddles, very short meetings to debrief an experience. So something may have not gone quite right in dealing with a patient. So, okay, what happened? What needs did each of us try to meet as we spoke? Where did what we speak not meet other needs, so that we can understand how we relate to each other? So if it's a birthing situation and the doctor comes in and says to the midwife, "Why didn't you call me sooner?" Okay, there's a tension, the midwife feels the tension, the doctor who's, higher status is maybe saying something that seems critical. Midwives often in our culture don't quite have the same power, authority to do what they're doing. There's a lot of dynamics just in hearing that statement. So having a huddle to debrief that. How can we reconsider that moment? The moment the doctor walks in and says something like, "Why didn't you call me sooner? What was that about?" Well, maybe we can guess that the doctor was concerned about the well-being and safety of the patient. That makes sense. That's a viable, honest need. The need to contribute and perform competently in doing the work of a doctor. So that leads to the potential for coming up with scripts. Short little statements that you can figure out with each other, so that when something that repeatedly happens, like might happen in a workplace, that we have an alternative way of entering that, so that we immediately acknowledge what's going on. So the doctor comes in, and immediately the nurse or the midwife can say to the patient, because there's a patient in the room, "Patient, this is Dr. So-and-so. They're on call for whenever we might need them. And I'm now going to give the doctor an update of our status." And you can do the update. And if you need to, step outside the room to give the update, not within the earshot of the patient, if that is a consideration. So you can come up with a little script that allows you to not fall into the tension spot that you've already witnessed a number of times. Of course, doing nonviolent communication training in your organization, having accountability agreements. This might be a little bit like the script idea. I remember a number of years ago when I was in one of those training programs with Movement for New Society, that I was part of in that training program of a group of people. There was a subgroup, we were all in subgroups, and I was part of a subgroup of men. We had just witnessed some incidents that showed us how men would overtalk women, talk more than women, control the dialogues. And so within our men's group, we talked about that, and we came up with a signal, which actually related to just having a squirrel on the porch that we were talking about. The squirrel would go up like this and kind of do something with their little paw. And we just made a little signal to each other that we do something like this across the room, and give that signal to the man across the room, who could like, "Oh, okay, I might be over talking here. Let me pull back. Let me step back here." So having a little bit of a signal with each other, we could support the more effective egalitarian communication, healthy communication within our group. So any of those self-conscious agreements that you, with your teammate, with your team, that you can make. Okay, I think I have more things to say, but I think I'd like to open this up to let you talk. Maybe one other thing I would say is, nonviolent communication offers a particular practice called restorative circles. And that's a whole systemic, by systemic, I mean the entire organization would adopt restorative circles as a process. And so then when a trigger happens, you can invoke the restorative circle process and involve people in doing a lot of what we've been talking about here, exploring needs met, not met, honestly with each other in a supported space, so that we can get to the deeper layers of what was really going on. And this restorative circle process is in the tradition of restorative justice as well as nonviolent communication, so it can be done in organizations like basic ordinary neighborhoods, societies, prisons, schools, etc. I will stop here and invite you to share whatever you'd like to share. And if you've got particular incidents or situations that you'd like to explore of how to use nonviolent communication in your organizations, love to hear that, and then we can have dialogue.
Yeah, let's go with requests for what would you have done in this situation first before going to general bouncing off ideas things.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot actually see everybody at the same time because it's two screens. Even if you do the all the tiles view. Yes, you can do that.
Well, yeah, if you have a group with one person in it who displays this disturbing behavior in the group over a long period of time, and if you have tried to talk to the person, tried to explore the needs of the person, and used a lot of hours on that, are there any specific tools that you can use to actually explore that when you have a person who does not have that cup of empathy, as you mentioned, to actually know the person's own needs from what the person is expressing?
Mm-hmm. So if I think I'm understanding what you're saying, in a context where you have already done a lot of exploration, trying to communicate with them about their needs, understanding that, expressing yourself, and none of that seems to work, right? So the first piece I want to say around that is being really clear to not hold them as enemy, not hold them as someone who is intentionally trying to destroy the well-functioning of the group. So that, if that's kind of the most important piece, because then the next piece I want to say is there is a time when you may need to decide in an organization to ask someone to leave the group or to remove them from the workplace. But then how you do that becomes really important. If you're doing that as punishment, then they will want either revenge or they will go off, either angry at you or angry at themselves. And we want to leave people as much as possible with the possibility that they can take their experience and learn from it into the future. So now I'm only saying this assuming that you have reached a point of exhaustion, of doing as much as you can to really work with this person and engage them in connection. That's the harshest, that's the hard first question, if you reach that point. But it does not do you or them or the organization any good to maintain someone in an organization that then is disrupting the capacity of the organization to move towards its aims. Again, I would just wish for the possibility that with enough love in the room, that they will be able to hear what's being said. And as you said, it requires over time. So I wouldn't want anyone to be let go or fired after one incident, but that there's a whole process where we've been working at the possibility of improvement, because you have done the kind of rounds around self-assessment, each other assessment, like I mentioned earlier. Check. Vicente, did you want to chime in here?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, as usual, I'm thinking about schools, and when I've used this kind of expression while dealing with my students, and I think it's quite helpful, because you do not antagonize the student when you ask them to do something. However, when I present this to teachers in trainings, many times they say, yeah, okay, you make a request, and then what? And I have my answer, but I'd like to hear yours. Your answer.
Yeah. Well, you make a request and then the dance begins. Whatever their answer is, they're going to be expressing their needs, no matter what they say. Right? So that's the first thing that I want to hold conscious in me is whatever they say, if I can listen with my empathy ears, I won't hear their no to my request. I'll just hear them saying yes to some need of theirs. So can I still pay attention to that? And so if the answer to my request is some version of a no, then I want to explore, okay, what are you saying yes to? You're saying no to this because this is important to you, am I right? So I want to explore what needs of theirs they're saying yes to. At the point where the other person has a full confidence that their needs matter, that's the point where they may become then back interested in me and willing to listen to what I have to say. And that's what I'm trying to remember a line. You can, it's very hard to change the mind of someone who believes that you do not respect them. And in a teacher-student situation, students can often be in the context of not having the belief that a teacher respects them. And a teacher can have the context of believing that the student does not respect them. So, that's a piece of work to be done. To get to that place where on the table, your needs matter and my needs matter. And that's the place where the creativity of what the possibility is, what to do from here exists. Don't know if that's enough of an answer. Schooling is a problematic place because schooling is typically a place where we don't have much choice. The teachers, unless you're in Hope's school, there are some folks doing alternative schools that are trying to do things differently, but so often, at least in the United States culture, in schools, the teachers have to teach to a certain standard. High stakes testings are involved. They're not even really being able to use the level of creativity that they might have gone into teaching for. And the first things we learn in school is that stand up, sit down, walk in 2 by 2, and all of that. How to basically follow orders, rather than being asked a question, what do you want to learn?
I still would like to ask another question. I don't want to be greedy.
Go for it, Vicente.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if when you talk this way, if you need someone in front of you, someone who has some idea about nonviolent communication, because otherwise you may express your needs and make a request, and they may come back with a fixed strategy. I'm doing this because this is what I want to do. I don't know if that's clear. It's like you're using the book and they're using something different.
Yeah. So of course, if there's a two-way agreement about using nonviolent communication or the aspects that define what nonviolent communication is about, then that's a lot easier. Like what the example that I gave of me and my men's group and checking each other about our participation. With a one-way direct, when the NVC is, how do we practice one-way NVC? Again, the most important element is that while the other person may not be able to express themselves in the way that I think of as classical NVC, I can still, in my mind, be trying to reinterpret, trying to listen to them, having that guess. So my work is to keep myself clean from enemy images about them and to keep thinking about where might they be coming from. If I am centered in that question, in that curiosity, then my response to them will come from that energy and will continue to contribute to the possibility. It may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, but the possibility is open. If I shut them off and say, they're losers, then the door is closed and the possibility goes away. One of the things that's important here is that NVC is not a strategy to get what you want. I said this all so lovely and beautifully, and and they didn't do it. They didn't do what I asked. So NVC doesn't work. The goal is not to get what you want. the goal for me is what I just said before. The goal for me is, can I keep centered on my attitude of of my intention to connect with myself and the other, and always keep coming from that energy of intention. And what's one thing that's really significant about that is that when I keep looking at my self-responsibility and examining how I am being present, then I am an agent, because I am in charge of my response. I am in charge of how I'm responding here. Whereas if my attention goes to, oh, blaming them, then I become a victim. Then they, in a sense, well, they're controlling me. They made me frustrated. They made me do this. They are in charge then. And I am no longer have capacity to choose how I want to be, how I want to behave. So that's a really key piece about, where does the locus of responsibility lie? It's always with me. And for them, it's always with them. But for me, it's always with me, which gives me the option, the opportunity to act as an agent rather than as a victim.
3 questions in the chat.
Yeah.
One is Craig. Do you want to ask it yourself? Craig, where's Craig?
Craig's over here.
Oh, yeah.
You're muted, Craig.
Okay. So a situation where that I think illustrates one of the struggles for me is, how do I, in the moment, identify when I'm shifting into blame and that's getting in the way of my doing this? I think it's so easy to get sucked into a situation where get into an argument and need to back off and say, oh yeah, I'm blaming and so forth. So we were in a situation where we were discussing in a board meeting about whether we were going to have joint meetings with this other board that's part of the same co-housing group. And we were all kind of thinking that was a good idea, all 3 of us, or 2 of us. And then the other person said, oh, I don't want to do that. I go to too many meetings already. I don't want to have any joint meetings with them, period. And I just, I thought, oh, why is she being so rigid? And yet, when I back off and think about it, there are probably a number of needs there that could have been at play that led to her response that could allow me to kind of cool off, and eventually we did find a compromise that worked. But I don't know if anybody has any suggestions for how do you avoid getting triggered in the moment and back off and say, all right, I don't want to blame here. What are my needs and their needs?
Yeah. To avoid getting triggered in the moment means years and years and years of practice, and you still won't necessarily avoid getting triggered in the moment. So I'm not as concerned about preventing being triggered in the moment as I am about how we respond to the trigger that happens in the moment.
Okay.
Just a little side piece on this. I used to do a lot of diversity related training, issues of oppression dynamics. And we'd get called into a college where a racist incident had happened.
Yeah.
Really what the incident was twofold. There was an initial event that happened, and then there was the institution's response that said, oh, this is not racist. And then all hell broke loose. So it wasn't, yes, things happen, things will continue to happen because this is the culture we live in. But then how do we respond? How do we create that 6 seconds of space from the action, from the incident to the choice? So for you, you said it. You went, you had this hand noticing the somatic, the body. You're noticing in your body. Do you feel that tension here, or do you feel your stomach crunching? You might still be smiling because you're doing that, but you're already noticing something inside of you is just churning. So that's the signal.
Yeah.
I have a visceral memory of being in my son's room when he was just, 6 years old or something, 5 years old, and he was playing on the floor. It was bedtime, and I wanted him to go to sleep. And I already asked him several times, and I come in for the 3rd time, is Daniel, you play, and I go, okay, you know, I'm like this. I'm ready to shake him. It's like, who's got the problem? He's sitting playing on the floor. I'm like this. Okay, Daniel, I think I'm noticing that I'm upset here. I'm going to go give myself a timeout, check in with what's going on, you know, and then I'll come back. So yeah, I removed myself from the situation and just started thinking about what was going on for me. Oh, right, I'm tense because why? I'm going to do this webinar tomorrow and I'm not ready yet. I have to do some more preparation. So I've got this load of tension that I'm sitting on. That's why I'm so reactive. Okay. And, you know, as a parent, I can't really relax until the kids are asleep. Okay, yeah, so there's that need for ease and that need for productivity. It's like, okay, that's what's going on for me. Oh, I'm calming down. You know, and then I can come back in and say, so, you know, this is what I noticed, Daniel. I'm just concerned because I've got this other stuff to do. I can't really relax fully. You know, at least that's where I'm at until you're down. Would you be willing to play for 5 more minutes and then go to bed?
So that way you're owning part of it yourself.
I'm owning it. You know, and I don't know exactly what, you know, Daniel at 5 years old really heard in that, but he did comply in that situation. But why did he comply? Maybe he did it in order to contribute to my well-being as opposed to follow an order. I was no longer telling him, you need to go to bed now.
Yeah.
Saying, would you be willing to do this? You know, because it would help me out. It's like, oh, okay.
Good example. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know, I think as you told your story yourself, you know, sitting back, of course, you know, why would somebody not want to go to another meeting? You know, yeah, they'd rather go skiing, or they'd rather go to a movie, or they'd rather have a good conversation with somebody. They've been to so many meetings. So yeah, what are the alternatives? Maybe 2 delegates from each group can meet and have a conversation, or, you know, there might be 5 other ways to resolve that.
Thank you.
Right. Final question?
Yeah, next question.
Hold on, Harris. No, it's all right. Could you say something about the use of protective force in NVC?
Protective force.
Yes.
Yes. So the you know, the story that we always give is that the giraffe is kind of a mascot of nonviolent communication because it's very big heart, has to pump way up ahead. You can't even see on the screen. And you know, we all, at least those of us in the Western world, have this image of a giraffe being kind of cute, and we all have little giraffe dolls. But the giraffe can kill a lion with a kick. Lions don't go around messing around with giraffes because giraffes have that capacity. And the giraffes don't go around looking for lions to kick, but they have that power. So they only use it for the protective use of force. So for me, what does that mean? I might, again, I'm just in such deep in family dynamics that that's what I often go to rather than organizational dynamics, but I'll say this. So 2 people are fighting. What do? Protective use of force, I might physically separate them. The punitive use of force would say, okay, you're grounded for a week. You can't watch TV. You're this, you're that. That would be the punishment. So the difference between punitive and protective is the protective doesn't include the punishment part. It just looks at, I'm going to use force here in order to try to meet needs. So, you know, for protest, you know, if I throw bricks through windows, that's the punishment use of force. If I sit in at the nuclear power plant and say, I want to shut this power plant down, or if I go sit at the lunch counter and say, I want this lunch counter integrated, I am not punishing anyone. I am using my force, my power, to try to express something that I think will help. There's a Pema Chodron quote that I like. What could be more compassionate than preventing someone from hurting others? So that's a very active thing to do, to prevent someone from hurting others. That's what the nonviolence movement, you know, Gandhi, King, civil rights, etc., you know, has been all about. Check.
Next. I'm gonna read it. Somebody's saying here, William, I've done some work in NVC with a study group, but I'm curious to know if the dialogue grows beyond the somewhat rehearsed sound of when you X, I feel X because my need for X was not met. Would you be willing to? So this is the
how do we rise above that?
Is there a level beyond this where it begins to flow more naturally?
You know, it's, I would hope so, and it comes with practice. And sometimes what I say to people is never say to anybody when I feel because. Use that in your own rehearsal in your mind to try to develop the muscle skill. It's like, you know, if you want to exercise and build some strength, you have to lift those weights over and over and over again before your muscles is there. So I like that phrase, you know, when you I feel because, or when I feel because in my request, because that's training my mind to think differently than the punishment line, than the revenge line. And there are different ways of saying those things. You don't have to talk about feelings. You don't have to say I feel mad. You can just say, just express yourself in a tone that expresses anger without using the word. You don't have to use the word needs. You can talk about what's important and what we value and what we care about. So figuring out ways to turn it into your own natural language. You know, how do you express the intention in words that are meaningful to you? And what's important to me here is that the intention is what's important. You can use the NVC perfect language and, you know, it's you know, I don't want to listen to any more inauthenticity. And you can use words that have nothing to do with nonviolent communication, but if your heart is there, the person can receive it. I have a memory of an event, of something that happened with me I was actually at a nonviolent communication training program, a long intensive. And there was this one person who I didn't really like very much because they kept talking in this parrot language, you know, when I feel, and it was like, geez. And one day I ran into them and I was upset about something and I said something about what was going on for me. And they said something, and what they said was that they were struggling with their sense of authenticity. On a dime, my attitude shifted because now I could think of myself as an ally. It's like, oh, you're struggling with this? You know, like I was struggling with this in you too. And now there was a place that we could talk. I could become an ally. I could care about this person. You know, I regret that I wasn't wise enough, you know, evolved enough to have thought about that before. But when they were able to acknowledge themselves, I was able to step into being an ally. So, you know, find your own way to express your intention to connect with somebody and to connect with yourself. The words are only a support. Okay, check on that. Hope.
Our hope.
Hope Wilder.
What if the needs that are unmet are from the past? As in, I needed X when I was younger, might not apply to the current situation. We all have baggage we are carrying. How to acknowledge an NVC context?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I think of all of us as carrying trauma. Some more acutely from having been abused in one way or another as a child. Some, you know, more milder in a way, chronically, from the culture that we live in, from the generalized racism, sexism, classism, inequality that exists here. We all carry some of that. And so, yeah, I do believe that anytime we are triggered, we're probably carrying, you know, a lot of the history from the past that, you know, that sets us up to be triggered in that moment. Otherwise, it would just be, oh, they said that. I wonder what's going on for them. But when we are triggered, it's because there's probably some history. And for me, it's about acknowledging that, noticing that, to the extent that I can say, I think I'm triggered because I'm carrying some stuff about this. Have I received enough feedback over the course of my life that I know I've got some patterns Can I acknowledge those? And then, in that sense, invite somebody to be an ally, where we can develop those kind of signals that I mentioned before, like the little wiggle signal of the hand. It's like, there you go again. And I can hear that as loving as opposed to critical. So that, what can we do to keep opening that space? And that space may be troubled enough that we can only touch it little bits at a time. It's not something that we can, okay, I'm going to do an intensive with you, and after about 6 hours of work, you'll be healed. It doesn't work that way. We have to do it over and over and over again. And hopefully over the course of life, we lighten the load. And we lighten the load to our next generation. Hope, you want to follow up?
Yeah, my follow-up is just if you have any advice for when, I guess I've had it happen where somebody who's been trained in NVC is using the NVC language, but they are expressing some sort of like large need that I think is not a part of the present situation. Like I think it's their history from the past. Sort of like, what if it's not my history, it's the other person's history, but they haven't acknowledged that, I guess probably it's just part of the relationship. I just wondered if you had any ideas or advice about that. Check.
Yeah, I think it's the dance. You reflect back to them. Here's what I think I was hearing you say. Here's what I think you're saying about your needs. Am I getting that right? Okay. Yes, you're getting that right. Okay. Well, I'm having a kind of an internal discussion. I'm seeing something perhaps differently, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to hear that. So again, creating the invitation, the right time and space for that. And then express yourself. I'm guessing this, and I'm wondering if there's truth to this, or if there's some exploration that would be worthwhile here. Because in my experience, the reaction seems to be greater than the trigger. So that's what I'm confused about. So what comes up for you when I say that? And then they say whatever they say, and then you just continue that, more empathy for them, or self-empathy for you, more honest expression, and you keep doing the dance to try to see where that goes. And maybe it won't work this time, but maybe 3 years from now, they'll still remember that conversation, and it'll have accumulated in a way that starts making a difference. Check.
In a hierarchic organization, when a group has conflicts and requests, and an entity. Tobias, how about you ask a question yourself? I have a hard time deciphering it, to be honest. Would you be?
Oh, my bad. Okay, well, when you have in an organization and a lower group has a conflict between them and request a group higher up to actually solve the conflict, how does a third person mediator from a higher up group come into a group to solve the conflict? Or should you just not do that and say solve it on your own?
Well, I think there's always a place to invite a third party in. Anytime two parties are stuck and have done whatever they can, and they're not able to sort of move it, then yeah, invite whoever that third party is that you might trust. It could be somebody higher up in the organization, if that's effective, or it might be someone laterally in the organization. So you have to think about, what are the new dynamics that come in when this third person shows up? Do the two parties in conflict, do they have a trust in this third person? So that creates the possibility. And then it's basically, I think I would see that as kind of a mediation context, perhaps. Is there, if I'm coming in as the third person, is there enough safety to have a group conversation first? Or do I want to talk to the parties individually so that they can express themselves in a way that they would like to, without the tension that comes when they do it publicly? And this is what restorative circles, I think, are really, beautiful at, in creating that space in the room. It's like, okay, tell them, let's hear what you have to say, and invite people to do the reflective listening. And that's part of what the third person can do. You know, they can say to Hope, you know, Hope, what did you hear Tobias say? You know, what was the essence of, you know, what Tobias was saying here? Okay, and then Tobias can say, you know, and is that right? Did I get you right? Did I get what you were trying to communicate? And Tobias can say, no, you missed it completely. Here's what I was trying to, you know, like, okay, let me try again. And so you do that dance to make sure that, you know, person B is hearing person A the way person A was intending to be heard. Great. And now you can, you know, when you reach that calm point, it's like, okay, I think, you know, I'm ready. I'm ready to listen now because I think you got me. Now I'm ready to listen to you. And so again, you know, I keep thinking of that as a dance, but that's, I don't know if that responds well enough to your question. Okay.
Somebody is
Ozge?
unmuted, and we have two questions, but I can't seem to find who's unmuted and is producing background noise.
So anybody,
Right.
if you see in your box that you're unmuted, please mute so that we don't have background noise.
Unless you are.
Yeah, but we want to hear from Ozge.
Yes,
I'm saying that
and
right?
I know that there's another one, Faiza, after.
Okay.
Okay.
Ozge, please unmute and tell us.
Hi. I'm having a bit struggle with how to introduce NVC to organizations with the concepts like compassion, like love, enough love in the room, equality, power and privilege, and all those things, all those terms. I'm sensing that might be quite threatening or scary. But on the other hand, I cannot find any other way to express or introduce NVC without these words. That's my struggle, and I'm curious about your experiences.
Yeah, the first thing I think of to say is to be a model yourself. You know, before you tell people you should use these words and these concepts and we should all do this, you know, should, because the moment you tell somebody to should, that's difficult, particularly if they don't, you know, if the words that you're using don't fit their culture or are in some way, you know, kind of threatening to the way they usually do things. But to model it, to, in a sense, I don't want to say just subtle, but, you know, one of the ways we talk about sociocracy, for example, and the sense of equality is just say, oh, I'd really like to hear from everybody in this group about, you know, about this issue. Could we do a round, you know? So you don't have to say you're doing sociocracy, or you don't have to say you want to do a round. I'd love to hear from everybody. You know, we've heard from a few people, and I'd love to hear from the silent people as well. Could we do a round? So you're inviting people to express themselves. That's like one piece. Another piece would be to listen to people and see. Let me, you know, like what I was just saying earlier. Let me see if I'm understanding what you're saying, and reframe into something that is kind of closer to the needs language, if you will. I think what I'm hearing you say is that what's important to you is X, and it's important to you because of these reasons. Is that right? So you're starting to, you know, to move, you know, you're starting to display that interest in what's underlying for people, where they're coming from in their surface behavior. And at some point, somebody says, "Gee, you know, this thing you do this thing that's kind of really interesting that seems to, you know, help here," and that's when you can say, "Well, this comes from NVC, or this comes from sociocracy," and then if they're interested, you can, you know, go further. So that's the first piece that I think of is just modeling yourself, being a model, practicing it internally, using language that is as natural to the group as can be, so they don't go to that place of separation.
We have two more questions and about
2 more
5
questions.
minutes.
That's just a little starter, but I don't, you know, that's what I think of saying to you, Oscar.
I'm quoting here from the chat. Oh no, you want to add something?
Well, you know, I guess the other thing I was just thinking is, you know, I think like a community organizer, which says to me, okay, who's in this group? Who might be, you know, who would I judge might be open to what I'm thinking about, around introducing NVC kinds of concepts in this group. Let me see if they'd be willing to talk to me one-on-one. So you can start kind of building a more set of network of relationships of people who are now curious about what you're doing because they've had that one-on-one conversation. It hasn't been a public process where it's more tense, and you start building your support. When I think of sort of social change organizing, I think of, I want to bring the supporters into leadership. I want to bring the neutral people into support. I want to bring the anti-people into neutral. And, that's kind of the process of how things might move forward. So, check.
I'm quoting from the chat here, Faiza, if I'm pronouncing right in any way. We are trying to practice NVC and Sociocracy in our organization, teachers community. The most difficult aspect seems to be to give and receive feedback. While NVC works very well on a one-to-one basis, organizationally, it seems to us at least to be more difficult. Any tips on building a solid feedback culture?
Practice is the first thing I think of. How you have a meeting, how do you close your meeting? So that's one of the simplest little things to do. To end your meeting with, hey, let's do a go around how this meeting was. And please, folks, say something more than good, nice. Actually get a little bit of detail of what actually was effective for you in this meeting. Or particularly you might give some comments about what worked for you, about how the facilitator managed this meeting. So the invitation to start giving feedback. We do a lot of, in Sociocracy, we do a lot of feedback processes. That's kind of the third part of the key elements of Sociocracy. So I'm trying to think of what to say that's a beginner kind of notion as opposed to a practiced notion. Because I gave earlier the example of in the group, you can, okay, let's do a feedback round for all of us here about how we are in this group as a way to support the best quality we can of working together, and have each person say, again, what they think they do well, where their challenges are, and have a round. And usually when you open it that way, people are generous with each other. They don't automatically go to mean. They go to, if we're choosing to be vulnerable, people tend to gift vulnerability with love, as opposed to, oh, now's the chance I can drive the knife in. Yeah, find every little opportunity to practice. And I think this was a schooling situation. If
Teachers community.
A teachers community. So there's a ton of feedback built into the whole teachers community teaching process. What did you get on the exam? I got a 95. I got a 62. So finding ways to bring in the measurement. We're going to do something. How would we know if this is effective or not? How would we? By what measure would we know that? We decide that. So you can have a conversation about that. That goes, deeper than did you get a 95 on the test? What is the more qualitative ways of looking at that? So that might be another entry that is more familiar in a teacher's community where evaluation, is practiced in ways that may not be as useful.
May I add
yes,
something?
Jennifer wants to add.
What I really like Jerry's story that I've heard many times. That he was mentioning the person that said, oh, I'm struggling around authenticity, it was, I think, and how it shifts into other people around us being allies. And what is important for me in that story is that I hope you all sort of feel almost in your body what it's like when that energy shifts to, oh, I want to do everything to support you, And once it's mutually acknowledged, I struggle around this. You're inviting maybe even, in role modeling, inviting other people to support you, then you have a completely different basis on which you talk to each other. And you, like every individual can do that for themselves, like express what they're struggling with. And hey, I really need support on this, like whenever you notice me doing this, would you please tell me that? that is not something you have to put on other people. That is something you can do for yourself. And once it's mutually acknowledged, it becomes something that other people can latch onto and can refer to. So that's a very helpful thing where we don't depend on the group all that much. You can say it, tweak it a little depending on the context, but it can be said. And we have one.
I just want to say, that that person that I was referring to, so that that he essentially invited my feedback, and this was fairly early in his development as an NVC trainer. He went on to become a very well-respected, very effective trainer in NVC. And I would guess that it came a lot from his invitation to others to give him feedback.
We have one more in the stack. Hold on, now I lost track because I was talking. No, I read that. Oh, Craig had something. I'm sorry. I think learning to identify one's needs that are in play takes practice. Any suggestions for ways to help people in a group?
I'm sorry.
No.
Could you restate that?
Okay. I think learning to identify one's needs that are in play takes practice. Any suggestions for ways to help people in a group practice identifying needs?
So I think I'm hearing that the group might be willing to do that work together, if I'm hearing that question right.
It's nodding.
Yes. So in that context, let's see if they're within reach.
Let's go.
In that context, you can always do things like use, feelings and needs cards. There are a number of different sets of these cards. This is the kids' cards, but you can see, for example, a picture of this boy, I think, and lonely. And then there are other cards that talk about needs, to give, to share, to contribute. So this is something that I use when I teach nonviolent communication. I've got sort of adult cards with just words on them, or these that have pictures for younger people, and spend time with the group. It's like, okay, let's see, the way I usually teach when I work with nonviolent communication is that I'll tell a story that's alive for me. Like the story that I told about Daniel and his not going to bed. I told that story. Stories about my experience with my mother in the hospital dying of cancer and the relationship to the medical establishment. I would tell a story about that. And then I would ask the audience, like you, to, okay, offer me cards. What's your guess about what I'm feeling? Oh, are you feeling, sad, lonely, scared? What's your guess about what your needs might be? Oh, is it, love and affection, etc. So then I try to deal with that. I make sense of like, okay, yeah, I am the group. I've asked the group to offer me empathy by their guesses about what I might be feeling and needing. And then I look at the cards that have been offered to me, and I try to make sense of them for myself, my self-empathy. Yeah, I think I was feeling that. No, not that. Okay, this, this, not that kind of clarification, so that I have a sharper, deeper understanding of what was going on for me in that moment. So you can use that in your group, and do, again, like a rotation, or take an incident that happened within your group or that you group and have everybody work with the feelings and needs cards to try to identify, what was going on. And then from there, then you can strategize, okay, given this understanding of what the needs were at play, what creative solutions might we, arise from this understanding.
Where can we get those cards, Jerry?
Look at the chat.
In the chat,
it's being discussed in the chat.
So,
okay. Some housekeeping and say we formally close and stay on. So, yes, is this okay?
That's okay.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So here's how we always run these webinars. We close because it's time, because we want to give people the chance to leave the webinar without feeling bad about it.
Okay.
And but we do stay on. So if you want to stay on, and you have more time, that's great. But we will formally close because we want to keep our promise around timing. So, and we have another tradition. And that is
just so learning.
Okay.
Maybe I don't know,
learning,
because
yes.
not everybody's looking at chat anyway. How can you learn some more? How can you get the cards? If you go to cnvc.org, Center for Nonviolent Communication.org, there you can on their website look around for teachers of nonviolent communication that might be near you. There are teachers of nonviolent communication all over the world. And in that site, you can also look at the books that they have for sale. The cards are available through that website, and other books, tools, etc. There is Marshall Rosenberg is kind of the key author. He's wrote the nonviolent communication book. But here, like this book I was just looking at, Words That Work in Business by Ike Lassiter. Now, it's a little book. But it has a lot of the kinds of things that I've been saying today. That's available through the Center for Nonviolent Communication. You can go on YouTube and just type in nonviolent communication or Marshall Rosenberg, and there's a bunch of videos there of Marshall Rosenberg and other folks like Mickey Kashtan, Inbal Kashtan. I don't know who else has got videos online, but they're fun to watch. There's something called the NVC Academy, which produces online workshops or telephone workshops. So if you're living somewhere where there is no teacher nearby that you can do in person, you can go to, I think it's nonviolentcommunication.com or Google NVC Academy and see the offerings that they have. And anybody, of course, can set up a practice group, and there's a book that will help you set up a practice group, and you can follow it chapter by chapter, get a few friends together and go through the learning process together. And you can sign up for the practice groups that I'll be running in January. Check. So is it time to wave?
I'm going to hit the unmute all button because of our tradition of waving and saying bye-bye to have a formal closing. And as I said before, we are staying on.
Okay, that'd be great. There's so many people here I'd like to say hi to, but
yes, that's true.
I haven't gotten a chance to.
Unmute all. In that big of a group, we can only do that for
a few seconds.
Yeah. Okay.
So unmute and you say, all right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.